Let's go straight back to the southwestern French city of Pau. President Macron there is hosting leaders from the Sahel region to talk about Operation Barkhane. Let's take a listen.
Ta, Issoufou, Ghazouani, Déby and Kabore, thank you for accepting this invitation to Pau. We had a meeting in December in Niamey, and we then talked with President Issoufou as well. And I would also like to thank all of the heads of the various international organizations that have joined us here this evening. And we will be following this meeting up with a working dinner. I'd also like to thank the Mayor of Pau for welcoming us in this beautiful town in the chateau, and now the Parliament bringing together the history of this town with our countries. This meeting was an important time, given what our countries have gone through over the last weeks. And before anything else today, I would like to spare a thought for the civilians of all of the G5 Sahel countries who fell during this conflict, which has been going on for a number of years now. They fell to the armed attacks by the terrorist organizations, and also spare a thought for the military personnel, the French military personnel, some of whom we honored earlier here in Pau at the RHC. And I would like to thank you for your involvement in this homage with their families and their brothers in arms. And I would also like to spare a thought for all of the military personnel in your countries, especially what happened recently in Niger. The cost of this conflict has been paid in blood, and we do not want it to last. And that is why this summit in Pau, in my mind, is a turning point in the way we are approaching this conflict. We're redefining the politics, we are redefining the goals and the terms that underpin the organization of our cooperation and our partners' cooperation. Without further ado, I would like to let the President Kabore, first of all thanking him for being with us once again, run down with us what the situation is as the acting chairman of the G5 Sahel. I would then follow up and then we'll answer questions. First of all, I would like to thank the President of France for the welcome he has offered us here in Pau. I would like to say that we have done an extensive overview of the situation and come to the conclusion that 2019 was a difficult year for the Sahel region as a whole and for Lake Chad. This is because the ramp-up in the attacks that have been seen in the Sahel region, the increased destruction of people and materials, and the never-before-seen humanitarian crisis that we are seeing in that region are causes for concern for us. We must now move to the next step in the coordination of our action. I would like to say that today, more than ever, we are faced with the observation that the results, up until now, despite our best efforts, are not meeting the expectations of the people who are going through some very difficult times. As the President said, we have discussed a number of measures, and we wish to define pillars that will underpin our future actions. The first thing of note is the need to coordinate all of the actions by the various forces on the field. And this needs to be concentrated in a central way. Because we have seen for a while in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, we've seen the worst attacks in those three countries, in the central region. And one of the key characteristics of these attacks have been the GSs. This is why we have had to prioritize. We're not saying that we are ignoring the other forms of terrorism, but we have identified the need to fight against the IGS on those 3 border zones. The second thing that I would like to say is that we have observed the need to strengthen the capacity of our national military services, providing them with the means to fight the type of asymmetrical combat that we're asking of them. In that regard, military intelligence and the sharing of military intelligence are the cornerstone of the success of our actions in the field. And we must strengthen our efforts in that regard, strengthening our military intelligence and the sharing of the findings. The third pillar is the pillar that is related to restoring the authority of the state. We need to make sure that people can return to their homes. We have a lot of internal migrants and refugees in our countries. We need to open schools, we need to reopen hospitals, and we need to get people access to primary care. That is one of the pillars of the action we need to undertake together. And finally, we need to work on development. Development will come through the P3S plan that we have already outlined, and we will also be working on the G5 Sahel priority investment plan and the emergency plan that we have already defined using resources that have been allocated, and now we need to make sure that those funds get to where they need to go. On all of this, and this is related to other countries in the G5 Sahel, such as Mali, everyone commends the efforts that have been undertaken to work together. And it's important to underline the fact that governments continue to work on the implementation of the Algiers Agreement and continue to work on converging. These are the 4 pillars on which we must base our action. And this requires an international coalition. This international coalition involves actors such as the G5 countries, France, the African Union, Europe, and any other party that wishes to be involved with the Sahel International Coalition that we have decided to create. I would also like to point out that the recent conference for the African Union, the heads of state, re-examined the contribution made by the African Union to the fight against terrorism, including military and development. They have decided to contribute $2 billion to the fight against terrorism. And that is in the CDAO region. We are counting on all of our partners to continue to support our movement. And the main point is that we need quick and exemplary results, because the credibility of all of the countries here today are at stake, and the credibility of the coalition is at stake as well. The risk is that we be seen to not be able to deal with the crisis that we are facing, and that is something we are committed to not let happen. At least the military side needs to be sorted so the rest of the components can fall into place. Thank you, Mr. President. Just a brief follow-up from me. First of all, on the scope, why is France in the Sahel region? The question comes up quite often, and there are 2 reasons. The first one is, of course, as it's been said, the fight against terrorism. We are in Sahel fighting a war against terrorist organizations that are, of course, attacking our friends, our allies in the region. Now, part of an international movement, they are close to ISIS and Al-Qaeda that we are fighting in the Middle East as well, because we know that this is a threat that moves. And the threats in Libya and Lake Chad are also proven today. The second reason is that we are there to help the Sahel countries to have full sovereignty over their own countries. This is in the joint declaration that we have sent you and that we all signed today. It was a request by sovereign states to invite friends, allies, to help them support their own sovereignty against groups that are a proven threat to that very sovereignty. Through this declaration today that we are adopting, the heads of state of the G5 Sahel have reconfirmed their commitment and their involvement with the European, the French presence in the Sahel and other allies. The second thing I wanted to say is that we have clarified today, as President Kabore said, the goals. With this new unambiguous political framework, we have a monetary and a military goal. The first goal is the three-border region between Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. The priority is the Great Sahara Islamic State, which does not mean that we're not fighting against all terrorist armed groups, but we are fighting against them as a priority because they are the most dangerous today. To achieve that goal, we are changing our method by implementing a military joint command between ourselves and the G5 Sahel, concentrating on that region, combining our military force and our intelligence forces with a much stronger set of rules of engagement. Based on the convergence of opinion with our Sahelian counterparts, I have decided to deploy further combat means, 220 extra personnel to strengthen the dynamic and will reinforce the forces already deployed for Barkhane. Any country that wishes to join this new dynamic is invited to do so, European partners, but also African and international. And I would like to thank our European partners here today that have agreed to become part of the Takuba Action Force, which will be a joint force with multiple European states represented in it. The political goal is the consolidation of the state in all of the regions. We discussed the return of the Malian state to Kidal, and that political target is complementary to the military goal. Because what our enemies want is to break down national sovereignty. And this is exactly the same threat that President Issoufou is facing, and I would like to thank him for being with us only a few days after a devastating attack and a very difficult domestic situation. But today we've reaffirmed our commitments alongside him. As President Kabore said, what we are doing today is launching a great international coalition for the Sahel that will bring together all of the international action vectors, the fight against terrorism, as I have said, strengthening military capacity, as he said, strengthening the United Nations presence through MINUSMA, working with the EUTM, CAP and the European partners, working with the CDAO and the African Union. We've got the development pillar, we've got the return of the state, development especially for the Sahel region. Over the coming days, we're going to be working with our partners to make this Sahel coalition fully operational. On the 25th of March, we will be meeting in Brussels alongside the European meeting, and I would like to thank Presidents Michel and Borrell for their commitment, and also Chancellor Merkel for her commitment through the Alliance for Sahel and the Partnership for the Security of Sahel that we launched together in Biarritz. We have also implemented a meeting clause before the summer addressed to Mauritania, who will be the incumbent chairman of the G5 Sahel. So we'll be meeting in the coming months at ministerial level, then at state level, with regular monthly updates as well. This coalition and this work go hand in hand with two other commitments that the present states and the international community are continuing to implement. The crisis in the Chad Lake region, as has been mentioned a couple of times today, and also the situation in Libya. And I am aware of the mobilization of the Secretary of the United Nations on that front. I hope that as soon as possible we can have an international conference. I have discussed this with the Chancellor, and the commitment of the African Union in solving the inter-Libyan crisis is a core component if we are to achieve success. This will be part of our discussions that will be coming up later today. Today we have clarified the political framework. We have more clearly defined our political and our military goals, and also we have new rules of engagement. We don't have a choice. We need results, and we will be continuing to work with the President of the Council of the European Union, the United Nations, representatives from the French-speaking world and the African Union, who I would like to thank again for their presence, and we can answer some questions now. Good evening, Ivry Matoré from Malian National TV. My first question is for you, Mr. President of France. The first thing you said was that you work together to redefine things. But you have people from Sahel, people from Mali who want to understand what's going on. What is going on in the field today? If you go to the north of Mali in Sahel, people aren't able to move around freely. There are only military personnel on the ground, and people do not know what is going on. People want to understand, what is Barkhane doing in the field? You have said that it's fighting against terrorism, but people aren't convinced. People are still today seeing civilians being killed, as you said at the beginning of this press conference. People are seeing people being killed in the garrisons. 89 military personnel killed in Niger, the most recent event. People want to understand, why do we have 4,000 French soldiers in Sahel? 13,000 casques bleus. Why? People don't understand why. So today, what honest message of hope can you address to these people? And my second question is for the chairman of the G5 Sahel. The international community has committed to financing the G5 Sahel. Today, where do you stand with regards to the promises made? It is true, during one of our early meetings in Brussels, we were able to obtain funding, about 420 million euros. That was funding from the European Union, 500 million from our Saudi Arabian friends, and 30 million from the UAE. Regarding the use of these resources, I believe that we have already been able to take stock of the situation. There are differences, and we will be working with the African Union and the European Union to get an update on what funds have been drawn and what has been purchased. So my answer to your question is that we now need to compare our various situations to look at how many of those funds have been drawn today and what equipment has been received by the G5 members. The second thing on Saudi Arabia, we have not yet received the funds from Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Have already provided 10 million, and we're expecting a further 20. So things are moving forward. We have been working on these funds for a number of years now, and we have underlined the importance of speed in this matter. On that point, and as President Kaboré said, we are continuing to work on this, you need to understand the difference between payments and equipment delivery, and misunderstandings can come from that difference. It's important for funds to be made available so that armies can function, and we've gone over that in a very precise way, and the European Union has contributed through delivery of equipment, which needs to be followed as well. The United States have also been very present through supplies delivery and also their presence and cooperation in the field. To answer your question, the heads of state around me would actually be able to answer better than I can. The army is in Mali at the request of the Malian state. This came after a number of commitments and requests to protect sovereignty and security. But be it MINUSMA or Barkhane, when you look at the size of the area of the Sahel region, you cannot have military personnel, be it French, UN troops or European troops, everywhere. And the attacks that we've seen have been in remote camps, surprise attacks. And those are where we see the most victims. I'm paraphrasing President Issoufou. When we paid homage to the Inates casualties in December last year, he said we need more Barkhane, not less Barkhane. That means more presence in the field to avoid these attacks. So every time that a state asks the French army to leave, we will leave. Our only interest in this matter is fighting against terrorism and protecting the stability and the sovereignty of the states where we are present. I'm seeing a lot of statements. I'm seeing a lot of things in the networks. People in your country who are saying all sorts of things. Ask yourselves, who are they being paid by? Whose interests are they serving? Because I already have an idea of that. But let them realize who is being killed to save their children. I know who was killed to save people in Mali, people in Burkina Faso, people in Niger. They were French soldiers. And I do not take their deployment lightly. What I've heard recently has been undignified, and I would like to thank the heads of state for refuting these statements, because they are serving other interests. Ask yourselves who. Either they are trying to help the terrorist organizations who want to become stronger in your countries, or other foreign powers who just want to get Europe out of the region so they can serve their own mercenary ends. France is only there for stability. Good evening. Radio France Internationale. Mr. President, you announced that you will be focusing your actions on the three-border region. With Barkhane and the G5 Sahel, what does that mean concretely for Barkhane deployments in Mali? And is this maybe the first step towards disengagement of French troops in the region? To be very clear, I said that I would be having second thoughts if the political framework was not properly set. But today we have fully established the political framework. They want us to be there to secure stability and sovereignty, and we want to help them. I just announced a stronger commitment to Barkhane with an extra 220 troops, and that is exactly the message that we are sending. And in the coming weeks, we will be seeing more long-term consequences and longer-term structure being established based on our new commitments today. Over the last months, and this is something that has been seen in multiple theatres in Burkina Faso and the 2 attacks in Niger in the beginning of December, if we had had better coordination between the G5 Sahel forces through cooperative action, we would have done better. We had issues in collating military intelligence, and sometimes there was a lag between either the G5 forces, the national forces, and Barkhane, because Barkhane is working on its own intelligence and they have their own scope. So to reduce that lag, we have together agreed to prioritize the 3-border region. And that means a number of things operationally. It means further cooperation between the armies. The 50-kilometer band has been removed, and now action is possible throughout the whole of the 3-border region. We also have shared command that enables Barkhane and the battalions that are being made available by the G5 Sahel in the central region to fight under joint command. This enables them to share everything. What this means is that we are going to be fighting together against terrorism, share military intelligence, and be able to react much faster. And we have also been able to discuss the details of this cooperation today, enabling Barkhane to act in other regions through close collaboration with the 3 armies of the 3 countries of the 3-border region. Benjamin Roger from the Jeune Afrique newspaper, a question for President Macron and President Kabore. A question on the United States. Yesterday, they announced their intention to pull out troops from Africa. Is this a cause for concern for you? And if overnight tomorrow your American allies were to pull out of Sahel, what would that mean for you? Okay, I'll start. If the Americans were to decide to pull out of Africa, it would be bad news for us, absolutely. I hope that I can convince President Trump that the fight against terrorism, a fight that he is fully committed to, is at stake in this region. You cannot separate Libya from the Sahel region or the Lake Chad region. If we were to lose on any one of these 3 theatres, militarily or diplomatically, we would lose out. Terrorism would proliferate, and the fragility of states, from Mashrek to the Gulf of Guinea, a huge region, would be jeopardized. I firmly believe that what we are discussing today is key for the future of Africa and therefore the future of everyone. Because if we are not able to manage the resurgence of terrorist groups, we know that they have ties to Iraq and Syria, because we're talking about international terrorist groups. So continuing to use our means to help the African states win the fight against terrorism is necessary going forward. This afternoon, I noted that the White House had sent encouragements to the member states of G5 Sahel and to the forces in the field in the region. I would like to see that as a positive sign. So we are going to be continuing to win over hearts and minds. We are, as you've seen today, strengthening our efforts and positioning ourselves in the epicenter of the terrorist threat. I believe that the Americans are important in terms of means, military intelligence, and also the very solid cooperation that we have with them. I hope they stay. Well, I fully agree. I would like to say that we must work with the African Union as well. We need to make sure that the United States continue their cooperation with Africa as a whole. As President Macron said, they have committed technical means to the region and also funds to the fight against terrorism. I believe they are an important ally that we need to keep. You wanted to add something? I completely agree with what you just said. You said the most important things, I believe. Mr. Chairman? Okay. In that case, we will continue with a working dinner. I'd like to thank you for your presence. Now we need results.